All right, welcome back to the No Morning Show here on TTT. Thank you so much for rejoining us. It's just about 16 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock, and we're going to be speaking to President of the Supermarket Association of Trinidad and Tobago, Rajiv Diptee, because the association supports the government's proposal to extend the state of emergency. Good morning to you, Mr. Diptee.
Good morning, Natalie. Good morning. It's been some time, if I'm not sure. Good morning to the Talk City family. Good morning to the Now Morning Show staff, including yourself.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you being here with us. So, Rajiv, why does the Supermarket Association support the extension to an SOE?
Okay, so good morning. From an economic standpoint, when we look at the backdrop of COVID-19 regulations, as well as the restrictions already in place from a business point of view, this is purely from an economic perspective that we're having this discussion on this side of things. If we were getting into a human rights discussion, that's an entirely different discussion altogether. So I'm going to stay on the economic side of things. We don't have an atmosphere of nightlife where bars, nightclubs, in-house dining so far has been restored or been fully reopened. And there are very simple explanations for this in so far as that we are not even halfway through the vaccinations that require us to be where we want to be. And from that point of view, Natalie, I think we need to remember that it's only been so long that we've started. Yeah, it seems like forever that we've been talking about the vaccination drives, but it's only now that it's been really expanded to include all quarters of the country, because for the first time we have the abundance and also not just the quantities and the quantum of vaccines necessary for mass vaccinations, but also I think we've seen rollouts into all quarters of the country where different brands of the vaccines are now available, and we're giving people an opportunity. And unfortunately, this takes time. There's a window between receiving your first dose and a second dose, depending on which vaccination you receive. If it's a one shot, if it's the AstraZeneca, if it's the Pfizer, if it's the Sinopharm, there are windows of time associated with this. From our point of view, there are 4 months left in the year. And you know, when we talk about the economic recovery and the emergence of all these variants, including Delta, not to mention the ones that already exist around the world, including the South African. The reality is that when we talk about business, economy, and a recovery, it's inextricably linked to the vaccination discussion.
Yeah, but we have heard from the opposition that, according to the opposition leader, the Honorable Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, says that we have not seen the gains that we've gotten from the state of emergency. And what she did was a comparison of the amount of positive cases and deaths before the SOE and since the SOE. And she's saying that we haven't got the kind of numbers that we want. So if we recognize that we're not getting the kind of gains, why not do away with the SOE? We could always do curfew hours for these businesses that are still unopened. So do we really need an extension to the SOE and not just some curfew hours?
I think that's something you could look at. I think it's something that we can consider, because from a practical point of view, it's not that we're looking at the state of emergency per se as something to trample on rights. Because from our point of view as well, remember, we're also affected deeply in the private sector on the retail and distribution side, and we've heard from our members. I think what we're really concerned about, at least from our perspective, is that any perceived relaxation of COVID-19 regulations means that we're taking it easy on the restrictions and the regulations in place. We're already seeing lax behavior, and not just from our customers, but also from our staff members, with mask wearing, those regulations in place for their safety. And also, we've noted that it's taking more time to get them to buy into the vaccination initiative. And this is something that unfortunately, it needs time. This pandemic, you can't just force someone to take a vaccination overnight. many conversations, and that's a different debate altogether, because that's a controversy that's raging right now in the private sector, the mandatory side of vaccinations. But we are spending time, and unfortunately it is taking time. And what we're seeing is, if we were to what we're really concerned about, Natalie, is that we don't want to get into yo-yo cycles of lockdown, reopen, because the effects of these could be more calamitous if we allow ourselves to go down that road. So from our point of view, I think we support some form of curfew, and it doesn't have to exist in the state of emergency framework, but certainly there needs to be a strict control as we get to the threshold of herd immunity, which is where we want to be.
Right. So you believe that if the state of emergency is lifted, that people's enthusiasm, to go out and party and to be, liming and gathering will not be curbed?
No, I don't believe so. We are on the ground. We feel the frustration with customers. We're on the ground in communities all the time. I mean, we get everybody from the grassroots to the middle class to the upper class passing through our stores. So we understand the sentiments, the emotions, the frustrations, the general population feeling. And the reality is that in many ways, they've already begun to proverbially free up, so to speak. And you don't want to send the wrong messages, especially at a time when we're asking people to take vaccines, some of which exist under emergency use licensing. Pfizer's gotten the full FDA approval, so people are now scrambling for that. But the thing is, that's only available from 12 to 18 years. So you're still having the discussion where you are proverbially pulling teeth with your own staff, with your own loved ones and family members. And unfortunately, what can happen, Natalie, is if their enthusiasm gets out of control and then there's a wave that leads to another outbreak of cases, that means that the government has no choice but to be strict. So we rather err on the side of caution right now.
All right, let us look at the other side of the coin. So while, according to the opposition, we haven't gotten the kind of control that we would have wanted to experience and enjoy from the state of emergency, the reality is, to me, with the state of emergency, we are seeing a leveling off, or to me, some level of control with the amount of positive cases that we're getting daily. With that in place, and with that level of control that we're seeing now, or stability, let me use that word, with that level of stability that we're seeing now, is the state of emergency justifiable?
I think when we talk about the state of emergency, I think we need to really examine what it means to the perceived rights of national freedom. I think if we were to interchange that, and I understand what the opposition leader is asking, because they're really talking about mechanisms for crowd control with curfew hours and that kind of thing. I think what the state of emergency allows our protective services to do is to ensure that they have more authority on the legislative side of things, because it gives them more powers to act. And in the pandemic, that's really what they're seeking, because they have their own issues with manpower, resources, and all of that. So, and what I like to remind people is that it was not so long ago that we had no vaccines in this country. It was up to 2.5 months ago that the first mass exercise began, because we began it in the private sector because we wanted to push the national recovery, and we are still going at Center Point Mall every week. So we can tell you the challenges with sitting and talking to people about what's in their best interest. I myself am doing it today at Center Point Mall. So it's not that I am advocating trampling human rights. We spend time talking to people to try to get them to understand what's in their best interest, so that their livelihood in the long run is protected. And that is something that we are still in the act of doing. And I think that we will very much be in the act of doing that for the remainder of 2021, Natalie.
Yeah, but when it comes on to the livelihoods too, when we look at it, as you said, there are still a lot of sectors that are still unopened, especially those in the creative entertainment sector that would more or less have events at night times, evening, that kind of thing. Isn't this also, with the extension of the SOE and the closure of those sectors, isn't that also going to have some negative economic impact?
I think that it's had a very negative economic impact. I think people in Trinidad and Tobago need to understand that this is a global situation and that they can find many reference points around the world. I mean, if we look at Europe and North America, they've had parties, because we just talked about those sectors, where they only allow fully vaccinated persons to attend. And the reality is that we're not even halfway vaccinated as yet. I think we are at 480,000 of a first dose. And I think, and we're reaching a hesitancy ceiling, Natalie. So it's very worrying to me as an individual, because I care a lot about my staff, my immediate family, my parents, and I want them to feel safe when they go out, that you don't have to wear that mask, I don't have to wear that mask, that if we get COVID, we're not going to have a life-threatening situation. And certainly those sectors where more persons have to interact and be in groups and crowds certainly has the potential for clusters of the virus being spread. So we would want to ensure that 95% of those persons in those arenas are vaccinated, because certainly I want to get back to the freedoms we are traditionally used to enjoying. But what I don't want to get into, Natalie, is a situation where I have to get into a lockdown again, because we had a few errant persons who, for many reasons, did not want to listen to the regulations, didn't want to listen, and then we have an outbreak again, and then we go back into X amount of persons in my building and 6 feet social distancing. These things can only become part of the past if they become part of the present discussion about vaccinations. And I'm not here to get into the literature. I'm just here trying to do what we know best at this time.
Well, what I'm thinking, Rajiv, is that if we have that state of emergency extended by 3 months, I mean, is it that we're going to be seeing these sectors closed for the next 3 months? Because I don't know that it would make any sense to have a state of emergency and then open up nightlife. You know, so what does it mean again for the economic outlook when we still have so many people who are still on the breadline?
You're right. It's an excellent question. And we talk about lives and livelihoods all the time. And I think where those sectors are concerned, those are the high-risk sectors, unfortunately, that have been severely punished, not by the government, but by the pandemic. The pandemic has created a situation where we cannot have that kind of grouping, clustering, gathering. And it's unfortunate. It's not just unfortunate, it's tragic, really, when we think about the loss of earnings, the loss of whatever livelihoods that they were traditionally used to enjoying. However, there is an avenue out of it now. And, you know, again, it's really about mechanisms to prevent unfortunate situations such as gatherings. It doesn't have to be a state of emergency. It can be a certain quantum of restrictions. However, even if you remove the state of emergency, you still have the backdrop of COVID-19 regulations like mask wearing 6 feet apart and, you know, these things. So you have to ask the logical question, even without the SOE, can these sectors get back to operating? I mean, where in communities such as the stores we operate in the Supermarket Association and throughout the country, we're so glad to see the barber shop back open, the spas back online, and, you know, the domestic workers back up, because this economy of wealth is what creates jobs, what creates opportunities, what pays salaries, and I think we need to be a little bit grateful in this country, because I think across the region they're still asking for vaccines. They don't even have the luxury of choice of brands right now, and we have that in Trinidad and Tobago. I think people need to take a moment to realize how blessed we are and how many opportunities present themselves. So while there's still a lot that we can knock on and complain about, there are ways and means forward for us to get out of this sooner rather than later.
Now, as someone who operates a mass vaccination site, and, you know, understanding that more than likely we are going to see the extension of the state of emergency by 3 months, what is it that you think we need to do to get past this hesitancy ceiling that you referred to a while back?
Oh my God, Natalie, I as you know, we've been running the mass site. It was initially at Center Point, then we consolidated with Diwali Nagar. And I was down there on Sunday, and while they had a fairly good uptake on that day, it's been painfully slow, because the reality is that the message, people don't want to take the vaccine for a lot of reasons that range from religious and denominational to fears about, I mean, listen, I'm fed up telling people they don't need to put a microchip in the vaccine, there's one in your cell phone. You know, things like that, and it's been a lot of what we find ourselves doing is spending quite a great deal of time with an individual, and then having to spend a similar amount of time with another individual, and that takes time. And if we were to treat with it like that for the entire nation, we would be going on like this probably for a couple of years, and we just don't have that kind of time, Natalie. And certainly, I think that there needs to be some more education. And I think that was what was missing on the part of the government during the lockdown, especially when these vaccines were being developed. We have to, we're now doing two things. We're doing vaccinations and we're doing education. We're doing awareness. And unfortunately, these things take time. And I know we don't really have the luxury of time when it comes to lives and livelihoods. But this is the nature of the pandemic and the environment and the society that we're operating in right now.
All right, Rajiv, we do have to leave it there, but let us really hope that that educational drive is ramped up so that, you know, people can get their fears, you know, allayed, and that they can get the necessary information that they need to feel comfortable to get vaccinated. But thank you.
I really want to see Trinidad and Tobago get back to a place where it's fully reopened, Natalie. And I myself, I don't want to continue operating under restrictions, curfews, SOE, wearing a mask when I go back out in public. So I'm hoping that by the end of 2021, we can reach that mark, which I believe is the 1 million mark for herd immunity, to allow us to get out of this. So if we as a country need to spend our civic-minded duty as each other's citizen neighbor, we just need to help our neighbors understand what we need to do to get out of this and try our best, because I really don't want to continue like this.
All right, Rajiv, thank you so much for speaking with us. The president of the Supermarket Association there, and he says that he believes that people are already tired. They're on the ground. They see how they feel. And, you know, if they get rid of the SOE, he believes that the possibility are we could end up in a third lockdown because cases might get out of control. So, SOE for the Supermarket Association.